Topics with IMSLP. I'm your host, Natalie. I'm here today with the wonderful Susan Zhang. I am so excited that you're here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Your journey from pianist to co-founder of the Concert Truck, which we will talk about, is extremely cool and different and inspiring. How'd you start?
My story is very unsexy. I basically started playing the piano because everyone around me was playing the piano and my parents thought it would be a good idea to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I will say though that I did eventually develop a pretty natural curiosity for it. I love the process of getting better at something. It became an outlet for me and an opportunity to be outside of myself and to connect to something that was greater. And so it was a slower burn, I would say.
How did you transition sort of from this like slow burn to developing this affinity for like entrepreneurship?
So I think that it all definitely has to start with the passion for the music. I've had wonderful teachers who have inspired and encouraged me and shown me like the possibilities and to encourage me to be curious. Any entrepreneurial endeavors that I've had, I think, stemmed from a desire to share. While I was in school, I felt like our world in classical music was very insulated, and I had a really strong desire to break some of those gaps and to bridge a little bit more of what we do with other people. In graduate school at some point I was thinking about my career and how I could share what I do to help benefit the rest of society in some way, and my business partner had this idea for creating a mobile venue, and I thought, that's brilliant, that's exactly what it is that I want to be able to do. The beauty of Concert Truck is that we use this natural ability of having performance art as a collective space for people, and we also get to introduce a lot of people to the music that we love in a way that's whimsical and maybe unexpected and challenges preconceived notions about what classical music is.
So the Concert Truck, let's talk about that. It's the type of idea where it's like, you wish you thought of that. You know what I mean? You really created something that redefines the concert experience and you bring music directly to the people. So 2 questions. How do you decide where to park and perform? And then what do you hope your audience kind of gets from these performances?
In the beginning, when we were first starting out, a lot of the venues were things that we picked and that people who we wanted to reach out to. So a lot of the performance spaces were high foot trafficked areas. So it might be like a farmer's market or a town square, something like that, or a park. And then we also wanted to reach younger people. So we were playing in a lot of schools. And then there are a lot of other more typical like outreach venues, like assisted living centers or hospitals. Since then, we've started partnering with arts organizations, performing arts organizations, chamber music societies, music festivals, orchestras across the country. Since they know their community very well and where music is most needed, it's a collaborative effort between us and them to figure out where we would be most useful.
What do you want your audiences to sort of take away?
I always just want the audiences to be able to have a good time and to enjoy the music. Again, maybe challenge some of the ideas of what they think classical music might be. Also to have this wonderful, beautiful shared experience with the other people who are there.
So you've partnered with some really incredible institutions. I mean, Kennedy Center, Aspen Music Festival. Can you share a story or two about some meaningful experiences that you've had?
Yes, absolutely. One of the most memorable experiences that I've had on the truck was during a residency with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. And they were one of the first big presenters to work with us, and they hired us towards the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that at that time, people were just starved to be together and to experience live music, and we were able to provide that. And I remember audience members would just come up to us like in tears afterwards, just saying, I haven't heard live music in months, and I haven't been with people in months. So It was very, very touching. And it was one of those things that I remember feeling like, I spent so much time in the practice room, like obsessing over making everything perfect. And it just kind of took me outside of myself and my own neuroticism to see like, oh, actually, this is why this is important. This is the heart of it. So another fun story that I have actually was at Aspen. So as you can imagine, it can be a little challenging to get the truck into certain outdoor spaces.
Oh yeah.
And Aspen is already like notoriously difficult to get to. I remember 70 was closed at that time for mudslides, and that's really like the only highway where it's like comfortable to get large vehicles to Aspen. So our only option was to take Independence Pass, which I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I am. Yeah.
So basically, it's like a straight shot up, and it's like really narrow. I remember the person who was working on carrying our truck to the area. He stopped at a town that was a little bit outside of Aspen. And my business partner, Nick, and I were in a pickup truck to go receive the truck there. And there's a small window of time that we could get onto Independence Pass before that was also being closed for mudslides. And I was about 30 minutes ahead of Nick trying to get through to Aspen, and I approached Independence Pass and I just looked up and I was like, holy shit, like I hope he turns around. I tried to call him. I had no cell service. He had no cell service. So I remember just even in my little pickup truck being like shaking, going like 5 miles an hour, trying to get through Independence Pass. And then I finally arrived at Aspen, and Nick, who is 30 minutes behind me, I kept calling him. I couldn't reach him. I think I left like a 5-minute voicemail of myself crying, like, did you die? Are you okay? And then he later arrived in Aspen, and he told me like all of these experiences that he had on Independence Pass. Like at some point, I think the pass turns from 2 lanes into 1. Or you have 2 lanes of traffic, but it's really just 1 lane. Side mirror got like destroyed or something. At some point, it started hailing on him. It was so awful. But we made it to Aspen, and we did our 3-week residency there. So
you're really dedicated to getting that truck everywhere.
Yeah, and it was worth it. I mean, to play on the side of a mountain, as we did many times in Aspen, it was a surreal experience in a lot of ways.
Concert Truck, it's not just a performance venue, it's also an avenue to mentor people and like community engagement. What advice would you give these young artists that you're mentoring, like how to connect to audiences or how to, be a musician in this world?
That's a great question. I think that there's no one way to do it because everyone's different. And obviously this is the path that I took. But I would encourage young artists to do some soul searching and try to figure out how it is that they want to do it. That process is very individual, but it could look like figuring out what your interests are, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and being honest with yourself about that and really loving yourself for that. In tandem with that, you can't be afraid of failure. That's a big one, and that's something that I feel like I myself have obviously had to conquer in a lot of ways and continue to conquer, because so much of building a career and sharing music is the act of putting yourself out there, and with that comes risk, right? And I do feel like as performers we are forced to deal with failure in certain regards, right? So we have our lessons and we have our studio classes where we have to test out our repertoire. And I always like to call my first performance the first pancake, right?
That's so cute.
Because it never turns out well.
I'm going to use that.
Yeah. It's like, well, that was the first pancake. But we get used to that habit of understanding that, we're testing things out. And I think you can do that with your career as well. It's like an idea of like prototyping ideas. And I think sometimes that skill may not be as directly transferable mentally into your career because it feels like the stakes are so high. But I think that the more you can approach your career with curiosity and this sense of, well, let's just see what works, right? The more success you'll likely have, and the more you'll stumble upon something that's really meaningful to you, right? And also in line with that, I think, the embracing of failure teaches a kind of humility that's like great for mental health and also great for musicianship. It's this daily practice of taking yourself outside of yourself, right? And so much of music really is that. You're just trying to find this thread of sound that you can latch onto while you're playing. And I think, again, I think that's just great for healthy living, to be able to do that. It's such a blessing that we can do that as artists. Yeah, I think that not being afraid of taking a path that's a little less traditional is also good. And I think, you have to think about who you're living for, right? So it's like, are you living to meet a certain kind of expectation, or are you living for yourself? And obviously there's balance within that. You have to be able to see yourself within a larger picture, being able to zoom out from just how you perceive the world and your priorities, and kind of seeing how music fits within a larger picture while still maintaining the things you believe and your perspective. It's an art. But I think that being able to hold all of that information and all those perspectives, it can help lead you to a path that makes sense. So
thinking in that way, it almost forces you to think of different paths to take. Sometimes how you think you're going to benefit others might clash with what you thought being a musician is.
Totally. And that's part of the prototyping I'm talking about. Like, you have certain assumptions about what your value is and how you're perceived, how you perceive yourself. And I think the only way to really test those assumptions, you can't do it in a practice room, you can't do it in your brain. You actually just have to try it and see. I like to think of it as this cycle, right? You're talking about personal fulfillment versus, pleasing others or being a benefit to others. And I think there's a kind of dichotomy with that, the way that people see those things. Like, if I am doing something for other people, it's taking away from myself. But I like to think of it as a cycle. If you know yourself, you know your limits, and you accept who you are, then you can confidently bring something to other people, and then you take that feedback, and once you see how it is that you are benefiting other people, then bring self-fulfillment, right? Those two things work together and are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Let's say time travel existed. Wild, right? Where would you park your truck? What era? What place?
Oh, God. Okay. This is a bit of a cop-out answer, but I feel like history repeats itself. And anything that can be accomplished by putting a truck in a previous place, it's probably going to happen within my lifetime, I think. I mean, we're going through some major historical events right now. If I could time travel, something I've always been really curious about is being able to play pieces that have been written recently for composers from way back when. So, for example, if I could go to Beethoven and be like, oh, this is something by Piazzolla. It was written like way after you, but what do you think about this? Or this is something by Scriabin or Boulez. This came out of the things that you wrote. What do you think about how we evolved? Or even to play like pop music for him.
I'm just imagining Beethoven listening to like Daft Punk.
I know. It's nice beat.
Nice beat. I know it's off season right now. I hope you're enjoying your well-deserved rest. Where can we find you and your concert truck and everything?
So we'll be hitting the road again in the spring, and you can find our schedule at theconcerttruck.org, or you could go on social media at theconcerttruck, and we'll be posting that more specific schedules closer to the dates. And if you're curious to know what I'm up to outside of Concert Truck during the off season, you can visit my social media at SANZANZ26.
We will all do that. This was an incredibly insightful conversation. I certainly learned a lot. I know all of you probably learned a lot too from this brilliant woman. I'm so sorry for interrupting your practicing. It sounded beautiful.
Not at all. I'm always happy to take a practice break with you.
Aww. Thank you for coming to Practice Room Breaks with me and with Susan. We'll see you next time.